and welcome back to Ben's Rate Nation. I'm your host, Ben. Look, for months now, one document is echoed through government meetings across St. Joseph County, City Hall, county government, school board meetings. The same report quoted, praised, and wielded if somehow questioning it were off limits. But government reports aren't holy scripture, and they're supposed to survive scrutiny. So today, we're going to take this report off of its pedestal, examine the evidence, and expose the contradictions, and ask one simple question: is this objective research or political activism disguised as public policy? South Bend has released a 138-page document called the South Bend Reparatory Justice Commission Final Report. It documents real examples of historical racial discrimination and then proposes dozens of recommendations involving housing, education, health, economic opportunity, environmental conditions, and then permanent government oversight. But today's question is not whether discrimination ever happened. It did. The real question is this a neutral, critical, and methodologically reliable investigation? Or is it an advocacy document? Wearing a lab coat and hoping that nobody asks to see its credentials. Now, this full report is publicly available for you to examine yourself. All right, let's start with the title. The Reparatory Justice Commission Final Report. The commission was not called the Independent Commission to determine whether reparatory justice was even necessary. Apparently, that would be too open-minded. Reparatory justice identifies the framework and anticipated remedy before the investigation even begins. The statement of purpose declares that historical harms continue to burden Black residents, that local institutions must be held accountable, and that those harms demand redress. Those conclusions may be arguable, but normally an investigation collects evidence first and reaches conclusions afterwards. This report appears to be the academic equivalent of writing the answer on top of the test and then showing its work underneath. That creates the obvious risk of confirmation bias. Begin with reparatory justice as the solution, then collect information supporting it. The result often reads less like an independent study and more like a legal brief written from one side with the opposing attorney apparently stuck in traffic. The report does document legitimate historical discrimination involving both housing, lending, employment, schools, and public facilities, but proving that discrimination happened decades ago does not establish exactly how much of a disparity in 2026 was caused by those events. Moderate outcomes involving income, health, education, and home ownership can also be influenced by age, education, family wealth, household structure, industrial decline, migration, housing supply, crime, state policy, federal policy, and finally, individual decisions. A rigorous study would attempt to separate those variables through statistical controls, long-term data, and comparisons with similar cities. This report generally does none of that. It often places historical injustice beside a modern disparity and then treats that relationship as established. That is a correlation wearing a fake mustache and then introducing itself as causation. The narrative, it may be compelling, but it does not calculate how much responsibility belongs specifically to the city of South Bend rather than federal agencies, state government, private employers, banks, hospitals, or even property owners. A credible study should explain how many people testified, how were they selected, and what were they asked. How were their claims verified? Were accused institutions given the opportunity to respond? How was contradictory evidence handled? What statistical tests were used? And did any independent experts actually review the final work? This report does not provide a complete, reproducible methodology. It basically says that the commission relied on historical research, experts, and public testimony. But a reparatory justice hearing will naturally attract people who believe that they experienced injustice. Their stories may be sincere and important, but a self-selected group is not necessarily representative of the entire city. Holding a grievance hearing and discovering that attendees have grievances is not exactly a scientific breakthrough. Personal testimony can identify problems, but it cannot replace representative sampling, verified data, and controlled analysis. The report repeatedly moves along South Bend, St. Joseph County, the metropolitan area, Indiana, and national research. But those populations are not interchangeable. A county statistic does not automatically describe the city. A national study might provide context, but it cannot establish an identical local condition. A number can be accurate, but still be misleading. When attached to the wrong population, that issue becomes particularly relevant when examining Commission Chair Trina Robinson. Robinson became chair in 2025 and is publicly known primarily as president of the NAACP. Community advocacy is valuable, but advocacy is not the same as expertise in statistics, economics, or even casual analysis. At a 2023 St. Joseph County Board of Health meeting, Robinson criticized the board for appearing to be 100% white. And reportedly, the entire meeting, she was referencing the black people in the city of South Bend. But there was one small problem. The Board of Health represents St. Joseph County, not just South Bend. Now, South Bend's black population exceeds 20%, while the countywide percentage is approximately 13%. Also, the 7-member board had 2 vacancies, and a black board member had recently resigned. So, 1 black board member on a 7-person board equals roughly 14%, close to the countywide percentage of the black population. So the comparison involved the wrong geographic population. That is not a demographic analysis. That is looking in a room, counting faces, and then declaring the case closed. Trina Robinson's remarks that day were not just incorrect, they were racist. So she appeared to use city demographics to criticize a county institution without fully accounting for the correct population, vacancies, and recent membership. Because Robinson invoked Census Bureau experience, the mismatch becomes more, not less, concerning. It is a little bit like a mechanic announcing 20 years of experience and then checking your tire pressure with a bathroom scale. And here is the hypocrisy. A commission demanding that South Bend carefully confront unfair assumptions was chaired by someone who appeared willing to make a sweeping racial judgment before fully examining the relevant denominator. The commission asked the public to distinguish historical patterns, institutions, and jurisdictions with great care, while its chair's own public argument reportedly blurred the difference between a city and a county. Advocacy may qualify someone to represent a perspective, but it does not automatically make that person an impartial technical expert. The commission identified 5 major study areas, including policing and the criminal legal system. But the policing subcommittee did not complete its work. That means one of the 5 major assignments is missing, even though the policing may be the area most directly controlled by the city and county government. So calling this a complete final report is questionable at best. It is like releasing a 5-course dinner without the main course, and then assuring everyone that dessert will be investigated later. Sorry for all the food analogies, I can't help myself. Page 60 also appears to contain a table listing 335 families displaced in LaSalle Park, including 149 families of color and 6 white families. But 149 plus 6 equals 155, not 335. That leaves 180 families wandering around somewhere outside of the arithmetic. One numerical problem does not erase the underlying history, but when combined with missing methodology and mixed geographic data and an unfinished policing section, it raises legitimate concerns about quality control. Now, the report proposes dozens of programs, studies, financial initiatives, and even permanent oversight structures. But what it doesn't explain is what each proposal will cost, where funding will come from, what existing services may lose resources, what measurable results are expected, or when unsuccessful programs should end. Government recommendations without cost estimates are like ordering the entire restaurant and then telling the taxpayers, don't worry, we'll split the check later. The report also recommends a permanent reparatory justice committee and says current commissioners should receive priority if they wish to continue serving. That does not prove corruption, but it creates the appearance that the people who are writing the recommendations could become the very people overseeing, defending, and even expanding them. In Washington, that's what they call creating a program. In the private sector, it might be called writing your own job description. This report could have been presented as a starting point. Useful history, community testimony, and even questions requiring further research. Instead, it's been used as a political weapon by the radical left. The pattern is familiar. The commission issued a report, so the debate is over. Questioning the methodology means denying racism. Merely asking about costs means opposing justice. Those statements do not answer criticism. They just attack the critic. A genuine solution welcomes scrutiny, but a political weapon treats scrutiny as immoral. Now, for years, many institutions treated the Southern Poverty Law Center's classifications as unquestionable moral judgments. Now, in turn, the SPLC labeled other organizations, questioned their funding, and then warned the public about hidden extreme networks. Now, federal prosecutors are alleging that the SPLC had a rather remarkable hidden network of its own. According to an April 2026 Justice Department announcement, federal grand jury charged the SPLC with 11 counts, including wire fraud and false statements to a federally insured bank and conspiracy to commit concealment money laundering. Now, these remain allegations, and the SPLC is presumed innocent until proven guilty. But the allegations are highly specific. The Justice Department says that between the years 2014 and 2023, the SPLC secretly funneled more than $3 million to the Ku Klux Klan, United Klans of America, Unite the Right, National Alliance, the National Socialist Movement, Aryan Nations, and the American Nazi Party. Prosecutors allege that some donors funded leaders and organizers of racist groups, while the SPLC publicly denounces those same groups. The FBI director alleges that the SPLC paid extremist leaders and used funds to have groups facilitate violations of both state and federal law. The government also alleges that the bank accounts connected to those fictitious entities were used to disguise the nature, ownership, and even the control of the money. That's quite a plot twist. The organization spent many years warning people about secret extremist financing, is now accused of secretly financing people inside extremist organizations like the KKK. That's not merely hypocrisy knocking on the door. That is hypocrisy kicking the door wide open, entering with a marching band, then asking where to deposit the check. Spoiler alert, most of the time, the people who cry and yell and shout the loudest about racism are actually the most racist. Now, the SPLC may argue that those receipts were confidential, informants collecting intelligence. Those claims must be heard, and the allegations still must be proved in court. But that case does illustrate an important lesson. Moral branding does not make an organization infallible. That is exactly why no advocacy organization or reparatory commission should be treated as sacred merely because it uses the language of justice. The South Bend Report contains valuable history and also documents genuine discrimination, but it's not a judicial ruling, an independently peer-reviewed scientific study, or even a complete casual analysis. It appears with its preferred remedy embedded in its own title. It lacks reproducible methodology. It also relies heavily on self-selected testimony. It mixes up geographic populations. It leaves policing unfinished. It contains figures that do not reconcile. It proposes major programs without complete financial analysis. And its own committee chairman's public demographic argument raises legitimate questions about precision, consistency, and even judgment. This report may in fact contain some useful ideas, but once it's treated as a sacred text or used as a political sledgehammer against anyone who questions it, then it stops functioning as a serious political analysis. Genuine research shows work. Genuine solutions survive criticism, and genuine justice should never require the public to turn off its calculator, ignore the missing chapter, and simply trust the people holding the microphone. That's all I got. Thanks for listening.